100, and that's kind of a lucky thing, right? Oh, now 101. It lasted for a minute. Welcome everyone to RSSL Office Hours. I'm Jennifer Patterson. I'm here with Scott Nine and colleagues from ODE, and we're delighted to have you. Scott was bringing us some good humor in the waiting room before we started because the day and the time has a lot of intensity to it. So hopefully we can create a little bit of that same sense of joy and sparse between some very real topics that bring a lot of other emotions and angst for you, I know. So we care about spending this time together in RSSL office hours to do the following. We want to provide clarity around RSSL guidance. We care a lot about creating a space where your questions and ideas really pollinate one another. They also really inform us and help make us better in service of you. That we know that this time can be a really helpful time to amplify anchor ideas and really important values and continue to center what matters most in our collective work, and to also create a space for two-way communication. We recognize a lot of times communication from us doesn't feel two-way just because nature of both being virtual and often sending out emails or guidance documents. So this helps create a little bit more of a personalized effort to really listen well to you and create a space where your questions are welcomed and heard. Scott and I will facilitate today. We do have some guests as well. I believe that we're joined by some colleagues from ODE, Cindy Hunt and Rick Prager and Michael Elliott, who will be talking about summer programming along with me later in today's RSSL office hours. And also Ashley and Joanne and Michelle, phenomenal support in helping keep the chat alive and on track for everybody. So big welcome. I also think we've got Dan Farley and Alexa Pearson joining us today. So today's time will really center around the following key topics. Joanne, can you change the slide? Thank you so much. We're going to talk about summer programming. I know that for many of you have been thinking about summer programming for quite some time. For others of you, this is an idea or a concept that you're just beginning to hold space for. So wherever you are in that continuum, we hope that today's update will be helpful for you and clarifying. I will share first some highlights from the Best Practices Summer Learning Guide that will be published and made public on the 14th of April. And then we will hear from our team at ODE around House Bill 5042A, all around summer learning and enrichment, so that you can get some granular sense of detail scope around what that likely will entail. And we also have an opportunity to seek feedback and input from you. We'll give an assessment update and of course hold space throughout for your questions and answers, and then hopefully end with enough time for some Q&A at the end. All right, with that, I'll go ahead and launch, and Scott and team help cue me with anything that shows up in the chat as we go. So we have been hard at work kind of researching and scouting out in the world and learning as much as we can about summer learning and what the best practices are out there. Our hope was to write a summer learning best practices guide that really can help inform and inspire your work. For some of you, it'll come just in time. For others, it'll be a little late because you've already done a lot of work in planning. And for others, it might be a little before where you are. You might not yet be there where you're actually ready to get your head wrapped around what might be possible for this summer. So regardless of where you are, our goal in writing this guide for you is really to help support you. We know that there's a variety of options this year in terms of summer programming. There's a variety of ways to fund summer programming, and it can be pretty confusing, even internally, where it's like there's a lot to try to simplify and a lot to try to communicate succinctly. So we really hope that this guide really helps helps fill a need in this moment. It also has a really extensive resources section that we believe will be really helpful for you in helping to guide your thinking and provide critical inputs. It will be published on the 14th of April, and we'll also have a webinar forthcoming that will attempt to give a little bit more life and light to the core content of the guide. Next slide, please. So we know we have heard from many of you, and we know without question that summer planning in this moment, in this year, feels like asking you to run another 26 miles after you've just completed a marathon. So we want to be very realistic about that. We want to be very real with you around that. We understand that there are very real challenges in terms of stamina, ability to recruit students, ability to find staff, most importantly. And we are hearing again and again a resounding appreciation for the resources that will be made available this year that haven't been available previously. And alongside of that, in equal sort of tempered energy around how are we going to make this happen and what's really possible and feasible for us given the challenges that I've just named. So our summer guide doesn't pretend to solve any of those, but what we try to do with a tempered spirit of both inspiration and reality is to provide some tenets about what matters most, and these come both from some collective research and scanning of the field, as well as what we know will help you most respond to the challenges at play. So they're really attempted to do both things. And so you'll see here, we've really tried to narrow it to 6 key strategies, ranging from elevating relationships and enrichment to how in the world in this moment in time do you hire effective educators and invest in professional learning. So again, we're not naive enough to pretend that this solves everything for you. It certainly will not, but we hope that it helps you to create some direction and clarity as you design a program going forward. Scott, anything on the chat before I go forward? Okay. Lots of questions from you about what will be required in terms of health and safety requirements related to summer programming this summer. And so what we can tell you for sure is that summer programming that is sponsored by a school district will certainly have to adhere to sections 1, 2, and 3 within RSSL. What is also true is that depending on the program by which you're drawing funding from, so in other words, if you are planning or intending to use funding from the current House bill, then you likely will also, there will be parts of Section 0 that are implicated as well. So these requirements will be really important. We're all very much in tune, I'm sure, with rising COVID numbers. There's a lot of uncertainty around the variable. And so the way that we pay attention carefully to Section 0 through 3 and RSSL will be incredibly important for summer programming. And then this question about how do we pay for it? And some of you have been very honest in saying, this funding stream, these additional funding sources are helpful, and it's not actually your biggest problem. Like, how to pay for things is no longer a central question or concern for many of our public systems in this moment. But we wanted to help kind of clarify the state-funded streams and also federal funding streams. So in terms of what's available in Oregon statewide, we do have SSA summer program grants. Those are still alive and well. Those grant agreements are out, and the districts who have been identified for those were actually identified last year, as you well know, but we were not able to pull off summer school because of the pandemic or this particular program. So it was suspended for another year. So this will be the first year that this particular SSA summer program grants are launched. And all of the requirements within the guidelines of that grant still hold true. So in terms of length of time and what the qualities and the hallmarks of that program design will still be true for those of you who plan to participate in that program, who were invited to participate, and who will be reimbursed with those dollars. And then there's the Summer Learning Program account funds for summer learning activities, which is embedded in House Bill 5042A, and we'll be hearing about that next. So you'll get lots of information there. And then there's a lot of federal considerations that are important. So we've provided for you information around supplement, not supplant considerations. We've provided opportunities for you to revisit the ESER, what's available through ESER, as well as how to use and harness IDEA funds, Perkins 5, and lastly, some information around the tidings waiver and places where you can creatively and responsibly braid and blend funds to augment and come alongside summer programming. Okay, and there's like no chat activity, which is either indicative that I'm talking too fast, that people are distracted, or that everything was crystal clear.
We definitely lean into the it's so clear. What true or not true? We're just going to go with the friendly interpretation.
Okay.
The only question so far is if there's a link to slides, which Ashley will put in just a minute to the deck. And then quick question, Jennifer, is there a, on the SSA summer program, is there an ODE website that is best for folks to orient to if they're less familiar with that?
There is certainly a link that I know we're trying to make live, but let me, I just was on the, let me find out, Scott.
Okay, no problem.
Help link to it.
Otherwise, I think we're good to keep going.
Okay, beautiful. Well, with that, we're going to transition to talk about House Bill 5042A, and I have their team members here to help with that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Cindy Hunt and Michael Elliott.
Thank you, Jennifer. Cindy, would you like to speak, or I can just go ahead and jump right in?
I think I'll have Michael go jump right on into this, and I will be monitoring the chat if there's questions that come up. So
great, thank you. Well, my name is Michael Elliott, and I'm the School Facilities Program Manager, and very excited to be here to talk about House Bill 5042A and the opportunities it presents. So for those of you who don't know, the legislature, I believe the Senate has passed this now, so it's on the governor's desk awaiting signature. It's about a $200 million influx of state funds to go support summer programming, summer learning opportunities. There are 4 grant programs built within these funds. The first is Summer Academic Learning for high school students. This is focused on engaging high school students to complete their unfinished credits so they stay on track for graduation. Summer Enrichment for students K through 8, and this is again to honestly re-engage kids in the joy and magic of learning and school, and giving them an opportunity to learn some academic stuff for some social emotional learning, mental health supports, get them to reconnect with their peers, with their friends, and just really re-engage and have a summer where they just get a lot of enrichment activities. The third grant is a supplement to the Summer Enrichment Grant, and that's Wraparound Childcare for Title I students in K-5. And it's a supplemental grant because this grant is only eligible to districts and charter schools that apply for and use the Summer Enrichment Program. So if the district chooses not to do the Summer Enrichment Program, then the district would not be eligible for the Wraparound Childcare grant as well. The fourth grant is the Oregon Community Foundation grant. This is $40 million being directed to the Oregon Community Foundation to help to provide grants to other community-based organizations, nonprofit organizations, and other organizations to provide additional enrichment programming for students across the state. The expenditure period is May 1 through September 30th, and the legislature's made very clear that this is for this summer only. So we have had some questions from districts and charter schools. Can we carry some of that money forward to next year? Unfortunately, no, it is to be used for this summer only. We don't have a slide on this, but I want to touch base on the timeline and where we are. We are starting with this week, the week of April 12th. We are starting to engage partners for feedback and to solicit thoughts, concerns, from questions from the districts and charter schools. Just so you know, by May 10th, we will have to have this wrapped up so we can present to the legislature by May 15th where we are with the program and how we see the program coming together and how we see it being implemented across the state. So that is 3 short weeks. That is a very, very fast timeline. And unfortunately, it doesn't allow for a lot of iterative feedback. So it'll be kind of, here's the presentation, please give us your feedback. we're going to try and take that, listen to it, and then try to move forward with that to the presentation. But we really do value your feedback, and I just put in the chat a link to a survey we have put together to help facilitate some of that feedback from districts, charter schools, and everybody who would be interested in participating in these programs. So again, it is a very fast timeline. The timeline has been set by the legislature. So it is something that we are working with, and it's a parameter that we have to acknowledge. To go back to the slide, districts must provide 25% of the funds for the summer academic learning and summer enrichment programs. The goal of this grant program, the 5042A program, is to be very flexible in where the funds come from. So federal, I've heard it called ESSER, federal ESSER funds can be used, other federal funds can be used, local funds can be used, other state funds can be used. This program's not intending to put any additional strings onto funds used for match. That being said, if the funds come with strings attached, those strings must be honored and recognized, and any requirements and rules adhered to as well. So for example, if child nutrition funds were to be used, but they require very specific programs, that would be those programs would have to be implemented. And as Jennifer mentioned earlier, must follow appropriate safety protocols, COVID-19 safety protocols, including where applicable, sections 0 through 3 from RSSL. And we are hoping to have those sections updated and work to address them specifically to summer learning. And also want to point out again, all grant programs are voluntary. So districts have a choice about whether or not they can engage with these programs or not. So next slide, please. Yep.
Michael, real quick to
Yes.
pause, sorry, interrupt. A question, if you go back, you might cover one part now and another later, but a question about, are independent schools eligible for these funds? So private schools?
It is, thank you for the question. It's my understanding that these are designed specifically to districts and charter schools, public charter schools and public school districts. I don't know, if I were an independent school, I might reach out and see what the Oregon Community Foundation grants, whether those grants can be provided to private schools to provide summer enrichment activities for students.
Okay, and then maybe now or as you move forward, if you can talk about what does a 25% matching fund mean for a charter school?
So that's kind of a complicated question. So let me try and come at it a little bit sideways. And if I don't answer the question, please, let's continue to have a conversation. The goal of this program is that a district applies on behalf of its charter school. So I'll pick Salem-Keizer because that's where my kid goes to school. Salem-Keizer applies, and then the charter schools that are within Salem-Keizer would work with Salem-Keizer to get their share of the grant funds that come from the state. So I think between the district and the charter school, that would be a question of how the 25% match comes. I would assume the district would ask the charter school to provide 25% of the funds from their funds as well, versus the district covering that. If a district chooses not to apply, believes that this would be too difficult for them to stand up, but a charter school wants to apply as an independent entity, the charter school may, and then the charter school would have to show how it's going to meet that 25% match. So it's my understanding that 25% match flows from everybody, not just the districts, but also charter schools would also have to match. If a district, and I just saw the Summer Brandon, if a district intends to apply but does not want to include a charter school, then a charter school could apply separately as well. But again, the goal and the hope is that districts partner with their charter schools and meet the needs of all of the students attending that district, whether charter students or public school students.
Thanks for letting us interrupt your flow, Michael. Keep going and we'll keep tracking the chat going forward for you.
Thanks for thinking I have a flow, Scott. I really appreciate it.
Well,
Yeah.
the theory of this entire episode is we're all just, we're going to like pretend forward that we got it going on. So
Yeah.
keep going.
So summer high school credit recovery funding is, again, all high school students. Now the funding formula was based on assuming 50% of the high school students would need additional help or have unfinished credits. But please don't take that to limit a district to providing resources for all of their high school students. Just the funding was based on a 50% model. And again, it's grades 9 through 12 to help make up unfinished academic credits. We want to keep high school students on track to graduate. Same thing, 25% of the total program costs. There is on our website, we have posted all of the district allocations. Please note that's the maximum amount of allocations. So if your district believes that, or charter school believes that you need less than that, you still have a 25% match. You can't say, well, I'll just do it just for the state amount with no 25% match. Whatever your level is, you'll still need to provide that 25% match. And again, funding will be based on the number of students who actually participate up to the maximum in the grant allocations. The question is this a competitive grant? No, this is not a competitive grant. This is a formula-based grant. All the allocations have already been done per formula. So if a district chooses not to apply, that money just disappears. It doesn't get reallocated. There's no sort of rebalancing based on who applies and who doesn't. So the funding shouldn't, also that means the funding shouldn't run out. So for the summer K-12 enrichment, again, we're trying to be very broad here. The goal is, and like with credit recovery, in-person enrichment activities. We want to try to get students primarily back in-person activities. So enrichment activities can be STEM activities, physical education, dance, martial arts. I'll vote for Capture the Flag. I always love that game. But I mean, just again, a way to engage. There can be arts classes, a lot of different activities that can have an academic focus that can, help students re-engage with academics. There's also academics and readiness support. If you're going to do summer school, bridge programs, transition programs, going from elementary school to middle school to high school, that sort of thing. And also funding provides opportunities for social, emotional, and mental health services. So if students are really struggling, they need counselors, they need that direct support. The funding can provide help and support for that. Same thing with the summer learning, summer academic credit recovery. There is a 25% match. I want to stop because I think there's been a lot of chat and I don't know if I answered all the questions. So.
Good catch, Michael. So we got a bunch for you. Jennifer, feel free to elevate a few that you spot as well. So so one question from Summer, Brandon, you answered, but another one is, is there a method by which charter school leaders can kind of count on getting notified when application or guidance is posted?
Yes, we will be communicating as broadly as possible as we make, I believe the website has already been posted to this. We'll be trying to communicate as absolutely broadly as possible about when applications come out and when change in allocation, funding determinations, that sort of thing. Right now, we're aiming for April 26th is when we'd initiate the application process for districts. The goal is the applications are to be very short and sweet with some very high level, what are your programs, what are your strategies, what are your philosophies for how you'll implement this, along with how many students you think you will serve. We're trying to get the bare minimum. Again, because it's not competitive, because the funding has already been determined, we aren't going to have a lot of that sort of information on terms of the funding side because that's already been determined. And again, it's not competitive, so the evaluation process will not be as rigorous as if it were competitive.
Okay, and then I don't know if you can speak to whether ADM or ADMW was used to determine the allocation, and then how are the allocations of charter schools factored in their relationship to districts?
So I can speak a little bit to that. For the high school grant, ADM was used. For the K-8 grant, ADMW, so weighted ADM was used, and that poverty's weight was increased to 1.0 as opposed to the current, I believe it's still 0.25. And that was what was used for the K-8 students. And then as much as possible, charter school allocations were based on the charter school ADM and or ADMW that would apply. So for example, if a charter school is only a K-8 charter school, then it won't have any funding for the high school program because again, there are no high school students. And similarly, if it's a high school only charter school, then it would not be getting any funding under the K-8 grant.
Jennifer, you spot anything?
Just, you captured it just quickly, getting some private chat around charters where their district is saying, we don't intend to include you, so you need to reach out and apply separately. Will there be a clear process, Michael, for that piece?
Yes, no, the charter school would just submit an application on their own behalf. So we would see then probably 2 applications from that district, one for the district and then one for the charter.
I see one more from Sunshine Price. Can we get funding for incoming kindergartners? So kindergartner jumpstart camp. So kind of, Michael, for the summer, what's the age threshold of the K part of the K?
So that's an interesting question. I'm going to go a little bit on a limb here. I will follow up to make sure, but I would say that the funding allocation is based on current K-8 students. If your program, if your school district would like to, do a jumpstart program for pre-K students going into kindergarten, I believe that would be acceptable. We're trying to be very broad and flexible here. So when you say, can you get funding for that? Well, the funding's already set. And if you choose to use some of that funding for a jumpstart program, that would be fine. Okay, I'm getting nods from Jennifer.
Okay, I think we're caught up in the chat.
Okay, now let's go to the next slide then. So here are the eligible uses. And I know in other grant programs, sometimes examples have been used, but we want districts and charter schools to read these very broadly. So for example, teachers and support personnel, that's not just teachers, that's not just instructional assistants, that may be, some administrative support, not like the district level administrative support, maybe a couple secretaries for handling some of the paperwork. It could also be facility personnel. If you're opening up your school, and your school is going to be a hub for some of these enrichment activities, you're going to need custodial services and probably some groundskeeping services to make sure the school is in good condition for students. So those would also be included in teacher and support personnel. Curriculum, supplies, technology, we want districts to think broadly. What will they need to be able to make these programs as best as possible and to maximize the reach to students? And also, what will districts need in order to prioritize students that have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic? And I want to pause, and I haven't covered that yet, but that's very important. That was a very important item when this was brought up in hearings at the legislature. It's very important to ODE that really the goal of these programs is to prioritize those students that have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. It's to really reach out to them, re-engage with them, and get them, some very positive experiences for this summer. Along with that, COVID-19 related expenses, sanitizing, personal protective equipment, again, read it very broadly. If your district wants to hire third parties to come in and do special presentations or special events or specials like programs, that would be great. Student expenses. One of the things we'd like to see districts do here is be creative in what are barriers that my students might have to participating in these programs. For example, for a credit recovery program, does the student caring for younger siblings? Is the student caring for their own children? Can we provide childcare for those students, for their younger siblings, if they're not in a summer enrichment program, or for their own children, so that they now have an ability to focus and help recover their credit recovery. Same thing with facility related expenses. This was actually something that was also brought up in the legislative hearing. What we want to look for are, does your facility need upgrades or improvements to make it a better, safer environment for housing summer programs? Now, there's some caveats here, because if you're going to upgrade your building by, say, replacing the entire HVAC system, and that takes the entire summer to do, that's not going to help it be a facility to provide summer programming. But if, for example, you're contracting with a community pool and that community pool needs a new, part, and that's a 2-week repair, great. That could be used to do this, because now that pool is ready to provide a place for students to get some summer enrichment, physical activity, that sort of thing. So the facility expenses are those directly related to providing either enrichment or credit recovery expenses as well. Transportation expenses, I also want to be very clear here. You still have to follow all the rules around transportation. So proper use of drivers, proper use of school buses, the correct vehicle to provide the transportation. But all the expenses will be paid for out of this grant. So you won't be using the transportation grant as part of the state school fund for this. That is not covered, but you can code those expenses to pay for transportation expenses you incur doing summer learning. Snacks and meals, all the expenses. So do you need to provide family dinners? Do you need to provide dinners and lunches? Is it breakfast and lunch? Do you need to provide snacks for some of the younger kids? All of that would be eligible expenses under this grant program. And then for district level administration expenses, there's 5% of grant funds for those administrative expenses. So I'll stop there. Any additional questions in the chat? I thought I saw a few.
Yeah, Michael, I want to surface one question here for you. Will unused funds roll over to next year? Could you answer that for the group, please?
No, unfortunately, they will not. Unused funds will go back to the legislature. So they'll go back to the general fund.
And I do want to add one detail there, if I may, Michael, that funds have to be expended by the end of September. So I think it's the 30th of September is the last date by which funds can be expended.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you, Jennifer, for reiterating. Yes, absolutely. May 1st to September 30th. So very
Beautiful.
quick. Very quick.
There's also a question here that I think is really worth putting out and appreciate. It came in private chat, but Cindy, those will require your insight, and we might not know the answer yet. We talked about this a little bit internally as a team, but I don't remember that we were able to land a definitive. People are really interested, of course, in staffing and how to maximize this moment. So the question came, we're really trying to get creative as a district about how to staff summer school and to create enrichment opportunities for K-8 students. Can we look into hiring high school students to help to serve as mentors and or a trained facilitator, sort of like you would find in a summer camp model?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you'd have to adhere to the regular, district requirements on how you go about hiring and, background checks and things of that nature, right? But yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Cindy.
And you could maybe even give those high school students some credit for it too. It's like an internship. I mean, be creative, right?
I was like that when I got paid and got school credit at the same time. So, is there a time frame on summer programs? We are switching to a year-round calendar and starting school sooner in August this year. Can we use some of this funding to pay for those additional school days? I think that one needs to be taken back to the team and flagged for further discussion. I don't want to comment on that one right now. So, thank you for the question, though. I really appreciate it.
Michael, when the team makes a determination about that kind of thing, where will folks get the follow-up to know how it's getting determined?
So the goal at this point is we're trying to capture an FAQ or a fact sheet and then that would be posted to the website, and we'll try to capture as much of this as possible. And it's not really a frequently asked question. It's almost like questions we want you to ask type thing, but it'll be trying to also pre-think some of those questions about, some of the funding questions, what we think districts may want to know, but we will try to post that and that'll try to be updated as much as possible, as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
So, and we have a request to go back to the last bullet on the high school grant. So if we could go back a couple, please. Nope, back forward just a few. There we go. And the funding is based on number of students who participate up to 50% of the students in district or charter school. So again, want to be clear that the formula assumed 50% participation rates. If districts have higher participation rates, then please, encourage all your students to participate as much as possible. It's just that's what the funding formula is capped at.
And Michael, and that's a good point too. I've gotten a lot of feedback from people. Gosh, we got a lot of money. There's no way we're going to be able to spend this all. So one of the things we want to really encourage districts to do is to like lead and do what you can with where you are. And so it might be that you start really small and you get funding to potentially capture lots of students, but you're for different reasons, maybe staffing or capacity, just how much energy and fuel you have in your tank, you might not be able to serve as many students as you would in a typical year. So you certainly aren't compelled to spend all of your money. We are strongly encouraging people to start small and do something with this, which is why there's such both broad kind of bumper rails in the best practices guide, as well as a lot of flexibility in the eligible expenses.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jennifer. And the question, when will dollar amounts be released? So these funds will not be available until the legislature releases them after we make the report to the legislature. And then the planning is once the legislature releases the funds, 25% of the funds will be immediately released to districts, to applicants, to kind of give some upfront money to help, buy supplies, hire teachers, that sort of thing. And then the rest would be on a reimbursement basis.
Beautiful. I'm getting some notes and noticing that we're 60 stronger than we were at the beginning. So some of you joined late, which is absolutely okay. And we understand the speed at which you're running right now. So want to pivot to assessment, but want to also name that there's been questions around how long is summer school and what is the cohort size. So just a reminder that any summer programming will have to follow RSSL sections 1 through 3, which does cover cohorting. And so details there, and Ashley can link in there what the RSSL guidelines are, so you've got a fresh version accessible to you. And then also to name that likely in other summer programming, there might be implications around section 0 of the guidance as well. So that's hopefully that captures a couple questions in the chat as well. Thank you so much, Cindy and Michael. I really appreciate you joining office hours. You're welcome anytime.
Well, thank you. And I just really appreciate Jennifer, you, Cindy, your leadership on this program, and Meg for all of her hard work on this. So thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, there's been a lot of energy and conversation around assessment, and rightfully so. And so we want to name a couple of things. I want to start by just saying thank you for being in the conversation with us. I know that we're hearing from many of you, particularly superintendents, as you're navigating and trying to thread your way through this moment around assessment. We also want to let you know that certainly conversations continue between Colt and the governor, a few other key states, and the federal government around this topic. And there continues to be really relevant and important questions around what stands to be gained in testing our students in this moment. And what's also true in this moment is that currently we are still on course to have our amended waiver in play. So Dan will talk a little bit about that and then create space for any questions in the chat. So Dan Farley, our Director of Assessment. Thanks for being here.
Good afternoon, everyone. So this is an update since last week. Things have been moving swiftly over the last couple weeks, as you might expect. So just an update that ODE received conditional approval on our amended assessment waiver request. And the public comment period for that particular waiver, which was our second waiver related to assessment this year, was received. We had 7 public comments, 6 from individuals, and 1 was from the Oregon Education Association. Of the 6 individual comments, 2 were in support of the amended waiver. Of those 4 who were against, 3 wanted no testing at all, and 1 wanted all testing that was required, administered. OEA supported the amended assessment waiver request, but were of course disappointed and dismayed at the U.S. Department of Education's lack of support for the original waiver request. I think notably Oregon Education Association named their commitment to the SEED survey that ODE has designed in that letter of support as well. So as Jennifer named, we are underway. Our test windows for English language arts, mathematics, and science open tomorrow and run through June 11th this year. The assessment team has developed a parent communication template for districts to use to communicate the unique situation that we are in terms of state assessment participation to parents and what their options are. That's available at the link on this slide. All of the parent communications that we have developed throughout the last few weeks are posted on the assessment team communications webpage. And I would also refer you to the top of that page for updated information about the state assessment system as a whole. We update the top section pretty regularly, and there is a frequently asked questions section that we update regularly as well, with a parenthetical telling you the date that it was updated. So our amended assessment waiver request reflects not only shortened test blueprints, which is one of the flexibilities that the U.S. Department of Education offered, as well as reduced testing requirements as conveyed on this table. So you'll notice that in grades 3 through 6, only 1 content area is assessed. In grades 7, 8, and 11, no more than 2 content areas are assessed. So that was what we understood to be the minimum baseline that the U.S. Department of Education would approve based on their approval of Colorado's waiver request and the negotiations that went on thereafter with the Colorado Department of Education. So that is where we stand as of right now with regard to participation expectations in the waiver. So next slide, please. Thank you. We continue to get questions about parent opt-out, as well as the possibility of district opt-in or district opt-out approaches. So these questions are present on the FAQs document that I referred to. ODE has not changed any policies or regulations around participation requirements. However, we must also acknowledge that we're expecting approval of yet another waiver, which is in the form of an accountability addendum that we submitted to the U.S. Department of Education. And we expect approval of that accountability addendum, which will remove, among other things, the 95% participation requirement. So knowing that there really is no federal participation requirement, we have had to be a little bit more lenient in terms of how we approach our participation expectations this year. So the second question on this slide is actually question number 8 in our FAQs document. It's being updated right now. It covers not just districts who have made decisions to require parents to opt in to state assessments. It also addresses the question that some districts are considering of having a district-wide opt-out policy in place this year. So the answer or our response to both of those particular moves is that neither is compliant with Division 22 requirements. Both are in violation of Division 22, which would require an acknowledgement of that fact by the superintendent when assurances are submitted, as well as a corrective action plan to come into compliance with the regulation by next school year. Again, the FAQ document that I referenced is linked here on this page, and I can stop and see if there are any questions that I didn't address that you are interested in.
Dan, I'm tracking a couple different ones, but one, if the FAQ is still live, I think some folks just need a refresher on kind of some of the things you covered last time, or I think Meg, you put in the recording for, was it just a week ago? Mm-hmm. You kind of gave a deep tour through. So for folks who missed that, that might help Yeah, Katie, I was thinking I had you in mind for that. And then Todd Nicholson asked about special ed and the extended assessment, and if we're following the same guidance, can you speak a little to that?
Okay, sure. So a little bit more detail about the shortened test blueprints, and then I'll follow up with addressing how the Oregon Extended Assessment fits in the grand scheme of things. So as far as the moves that the assessment team has made to basically reduce testing time this year, and knowing full well that instructional time is a limited and precious commodity this spring, we made several different changes, and this of course happened last year. Test blueprints don't change without thoughtful study and looking at reliability, for example, well in advance. So these are maneuvers that we actually had to do last summer to set ourselves up for this spring. But our English language arts and mathematics assessments, we removed the performance tasks for this year, so there are no performance tasks. We also shortened the computer adaptive test component. So this year is only computer adaptive test, and it's on a shortened test blueprint for English language arts and mathematics. The tests take approximately 1 hour to 1 hour and 15 minutes this year versus historically they used to take 3.5 hours for ELA and about 2 hours for mathematics. So we've substantially reduced testing time for ELA and math. In science and also on the Oregon Extended Assessment, we have removed field test items. That was the only option that we had available to maintain the test blueprint that we have in science and also on the Oregon Extended Assessment, while also reducing testing time. So that was the mode that we chose to address that. And that's how the test blueprints were shortened. And probably what you were most interested in was the testing time reduction. So about a 67% reduction in testing time for ELA and math, only a 10-minute reduction in science because that blueprint wasn't really shrinkable by a lot. The Oregon Extended Assessment was reduced by approximately 25%. And students spend a wide variety of times participating in the Oregon Extended, so that's probably the best marker for you. So in terms of how the Oregon Extended Assessment is being treated this year, we're following all of the same exact expectations for the extended that we do for our general assessments, which is actually the intent of the federal law, ESSA, and an IDEA. So all of the expectations that I just shared with you in terms of which grade levels, which assessments are required, apply to the Oregon Extended as well as to our general assessments. That said, one thing that I haven't talked with this group about yet in detail is that we have the SEED survey available for general education students who are participating in the general summative assessments. We've also developed or in the process of developing an alternate SEED survey, which will be completed by qualified assessors for students who participate in the Oregon Extended Assessment. So that is actually underway. We are planning on having that alt SEED survey available by the middle of May for qualified assessors to complete. And more information will be shared with qualified assessors in the coming week or week and a half about that.
And one more question from the chat. Can you talk about the kind of accountability that schools should meet as a standard for tracking opt-out forms? So if they were under any kind of review, like what kind of records do they need to keep of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've also, we have been doing, as Jennifer mentioned, we're trying to figure out all of the ways that we can allow you all more flexibility and less kind of procedural requirements. So I would say a good faith effort in those spaces is all that would be required. And certainly our interest in monitoring is not going to be substantial this year. So of course we want and would hope that communications with parents are occurring, that they understand what their options are. But in terms of documentation requirements, I wouldn't pay as much attention to that as I would pay to making sure that parents know what their options are clearly.
I'm trying, full disclosure, too much disclosure. I'm trying to shove food in my body during any break because I haven't got a chance to eat yet today. So I'm breaking all of my manners my grandmother taught me. Jennifer, I'm not tracking any other specific to assessment or to summer. I do have a few RSSL questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to transition us to some RSSL, but just one quick question. I don't know that we have the answer for this, but we can loop back next week, Sean. Sean Gallagher asked, what kind of accountability do schools have to track opt-out forms? So do you have
Dan,
an answer?
we just covered that one.
Oh, you did. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Full disclosure, I've got like people texting me and private chat, so there's lots of mediums of input that I'm trying to.
We can now do a comprehension check for Sean to see how well he got his answer.
No
Um,
pressure, Sean. No pressure. We're teachers at heart, so you know we
Just
believe
saying.
in
Good faith effort,
multiple
Sean.
opportunities to learn.
Sean for the win, Jennifer. You got to make a good faith effort.
All right.
Thank you, Dan Farley.
You betcha. I'll answer the rest of the assessment questions in the chat.
I'll pick up one from Vonnie Good from Salem Kaiser. The question is there discussion about backing off of the disinfecting requirements yet? Vonnie, I think we talked about this last week. I don't have a change for you around that now. There continues to be a discussion with OHA. We meet twice a week. It does continue to come up. At the moment, there's no change. Jennifer, did you have an RSSL question?
Yes, I do. Here it is. If a secondary school has been providing in-person instruction, can they transition to 3 feet even if the county metrics aren't green as long as the LPHA supports that move?
Yeah, so we're working on a communication about this, but I'm gonna pull up some notes so I read verbatim. Actually, I'll clip it into the chat in terms of where we're headed. So this is not, it's not yet formal, meaning we haven't officially communicated it yet. You heard some of you heard me last week cover this same question. Give me 1 second while I stall. Here we go. Again, this is not final language, so I'm gonna put it here. Knowing that we're still working on the formal final communication, we're gonna run this with OHA, and I think it will either go in RSSL proper or you'll get an email about it. But what you're gonna see is essentially elementary schools are unimpacted by the metrics, but you're going to see a recommendation that says that you take the date of your actual opening to or moving to 3 feet, work your way back 2 weeks back from that. And if at the time that you announced to your community and 2 weeks back from the date you'd be actually operating at 3 feet, you were in the green, you'll be allowed to continue to move based on the principle of like, it takes a lot of time on architecture to move. But if you work back 2 weeks and you are already in the yellow or red, then you'll need to stay at 6 feet of distance. So it's trying to put a little bit of a principle of allowing for some transition time and still attending to the metrics based on the CDC's guidance. So that's the general language that we recommend that you follow. And again, this is a bit of a preview. It's not formally in writing just yet. Well, it's there in writing, but it's not a formal announcement from us just yet.
Thanks, Scott. One other question as it relates to cohorting, and I know we talked about this last week, and I also know not everybody's able to come every week. So a question related to what's required related to cohorting, and a clarification from someone who says, I'm receiving word from a nearby district that cohorts are no longer needed based on their interpretation of the latest guidance. I read it differently, and that we just removed the 100 students cap, but we still need to cohort. Can you confirm that for me?
Yeah, and you see some people who are doing reopening, advising work, contact tracing, or any other kinds of things. So it's a pretty, I'm going to say it pretty strongly. It's a gross misreading of the guidance to say that there is no cohorting, and a mistake from a health and safety standpoint. So, interrupt anyone who's suggesting that that's true. The recommendation is still 36. The max cap is lifted, but the need for contact logs and the ability to contact trace and all of the implications of the environment are all intended to do that. In addition, very clear recommendations about if you move to 3 feet, that you want to have really clear, distinct cohorts in place. So I'd push really hard against that idea. And you'll experience the difficulty of that if you were to unfortunately happen to have an actual outbreak at school, because you'd be basically forced to quarantine in much wider circles than you'd otherwise want to. So just be as kind of clear about that as I can be, and then you can work from there.
Thank you so much, Scott Nine. Lastly, a couple of things. This is technical, and we apologize for any inconvenience, but we need to change the Zoom link that we've been using for RSSL office hours. So just a reminder that starting next week, we'll have a new Zoom link. We're doing our best to make sure that everybody has that handy and that it's well communicated. In the case that you don't get the new Zoom link and you end up in the old Zoom, we'll have someone there to greet you with kindness and to help you find your new Zoom link. But we're going to hopefully help communicate and pattern everybody so that everybody gets what they need and we find each other in this virtual world next Monday at 3 o'clock, same time, same place, different Zoom link. So I want to be sure to communicate that. And then also, please put in the chat, I'm seeing Julie asking questions about graduation celebration and anything else that you have that you'd really like us to cover. If we can do that next week, we'd certainly love to incorporate what's up front and top of mind for you in our time together. If we've got time, I wonder if do we have time to answer Julie's question here? She's wondering, she says, I'm planning an 8th grade celebration. Is the limit at this time outside gathering 150 or 250, keeping family groups 8 or less if the metrics are in the moderate category?
Yeah, so I just got the link into the grad ceremony guidance, and Julie, what I'll say is that the guidance is intricately linked to the sector guidance for outdoor and indoor in the governor, and so those thresholds are really what you've got to kind of track to. And I'm pretty confident with what your description is, but the details will really matter based on the county you're in. So the main thing to do would be to go, if you're, I think you said an outdoor event, so you'd go to the outdoor entertainment guidance, you'd review that and then integrate that into your planning. The ceremony guidance walks you through that kind of logic. So that should help you get your answer.
And Julie, feel free to send an email to COVID inbox. We're happy to help and follow up in any way because we want to be responsive.
That might be what's needed. Yeah.
Get you what you need. All right. Thanks so much for joining us. Big appreciation to everybody for your time, both on the ODE side and the school and district side of life. We so appreciate all of you. And there's sunshine for parts of us in this state, hopefully the whole state, but I can't be sure of that. So wishing you some time in the sun if you can find it. And thanks everybody for your time. We'll see you next week.